Hello, I'm Maria Hall Brown, and this is LA Currents. It's incredibly important to be counted, literally counted. And here to tell us all about Census 2020 is the director of the LA Census, Maria de la Luz Garcia. So nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me here, Maria. It's a pleasure.
Thanks. All right, now we hear the word census all the time. We obviously realize that we're in the middle of a census right now. But honestly, what does the census do? What are the tangible outcomes of the census?
Well, there's really two main functions of the census. One is that it determines political representation across all levels of government. So this is how we determine how many members of Congress we send to Washington, D.C., but it also determines how political districts are drawn from the state on all the way down to cities like Los Angeles. The other main function of the census is that it's used to distribute federal funding across all levels of government, from the state to local to tribal governments. So without an accurate census, the federal government won't know how much money needs to go to each political jurisdiction.
Okay, and as far as that funding is concerned, I mean, it's things like roads, and I mean, what would the average citizen benefit from being counted in the census?
The funding that we receive for every person that's counted is funding that goes to things like transportation, emergency response services, housing, healthcare, food and nutrition programs for mothers and children. It really is used for a wide variety of things that every person in Los Angeles, all across the state and in the country benefit from. So it's really important that when we get asked to be counted in the census, that we respond in kind and get ourselves counted, because it really means a lot for cities and for the state and for the county to get the funding that it needs to provide services.
And back to the whole thing about how districts are determined in regards to political affiliations and things like that. We only get one shot at this every 10 years.
That's right. We have to live with our decision for 10 years, which means that if we don't get it right this time around, we have to wait another 10 years to 2030 to get either the political representation that we deserve and the funding. So getting counted is important because it's a decision that impacts the next decade.
It's overwhelming to even think about. But I mean, in terms of, it's a very complicated process, because you're talking about, the United States of America, trying to count every citizen in the United States of America, or those that maybe are not documented. But how does the process legitimately work? I mean, you're on the front lines. You're looking at, the second largest city in the country, is it not? Trying to determine, making sure those eyeballs are, being focused in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, the census is a real simple thing. It's a count of every single living person living in the United States. It doesn't matter your age, your religion, your citizenship, or immigration status. Everybody who lives in the United States has to get counted. So the ask is simple, is once you receive the invitation from the Census Bureau, then your household responds in kind by getting yourself and your family members counted. So it's a really easy process. The Census Bureau will ask you some basic questions about yourself and your family members, who they are and what their age and date of birth is. They'll ask you for a phone number in case they need to contact you if they have any questions. But aside from that, they'll ask you what kind of housing you live in and what your race and ethnicity and Hispanic origin is. But they will never ask you for your citizenship or immigration status, and they will never ask you for a social security number. So when you respond to the census, you're not really providing them with too much detailed information about your family's status and economic situation in the U.S. You're just simply telling them how many people live in your household and then what their age is and their relationship to you, along with some other demographic characteristics.
Okay, so as far as that invitation is concerned, I have a couple questions in that regard. So first of all, what if you don't get an invitation? What if you don't get any kind of, what if you get no information about the census, you're not contacted?
Well, it's really easy to respond to the census. Whether you received an invitation in the mail or not, you can still respond to the census by going to my2020census.gov and responding online.
Okay.
You can also respond by phone at 844-330-2020 and talk to a Census Bureau employee and give them your information over the phone. So it really is something that you can do even during this time where we're trying to social distance and stay at home and be safe. Whether you received that invitation or not, you can always respond, whether online, by phone, or even by mail.
Okay, now what if two people in the household got it? My husband got one and I got one. Do we both respond, or does his count for me and vice versa?
You can use just one form to respond for everybody in the entire household.
Okay.
And this is especially important for households that might have, let's say, roommates, and there might not be a relationship, a nuclear relationship between the people living there, or then there might be multiple families living in a household. You don't necessarily need to fill out both forms. You can respond, one person can respond for everybody living in the household, regardless of the relationship to that person.
Given that everyone's life has changed in such a short period of time, I imagine how you were going to conduct the census here in Los Angeles has obviously changed.
Absolutely. We had a plan to do door-to-door canvassing and encourage people to respond to the census and make our case in person. Since the pandemic hit, we obviously have had to change strategies, and now we're relying on a remote phone bank operation where we are using our 1,200 plus volunteers to make phone calls from the comfort of their own home and convince people over the phone to respond to the census. But we're also relying a whole lot more on social media and trying to get the message out that people should respond to the census as soon as they can.
You know, you made me think of something just now. You have a phone bank of volunteers, but there were also people that were going to be employed by the census. Did Los Angeles employ people too, part-time for this period of time?
So the Census Bureau is actually responsible for conducting the count, and so they are the agency that hires the tens of thousands of enumerators across the country. Here in Los Angeles, their plan was to hire thousands of people to knock on doors, and their plan remains in place. Those people are now going to begin working as of August 11th, later this year, to do that in-person enumeration of households that haven't yet responded to the census by that time. So those jobs are still available, and my understanding is that the Census Bureau is still hiring. So for anybody who's interested in getting a job, especially during this time, the Census Bureau is one of those agencies that has plenty of opportunities available for people who are seeking seasonal or part-time jobs. More information is available on their website, censusbureau.gov.
Talking about the ramifications of, being counted, and you talked about federal funding, there's no way of knowing this specifically, but will this census, do you think, help with funding for relief programs that took place during COVID or even in future, hopefully not catastrophes?
Yeah, Maria, the thing is that everything is related to the census. It really is the building blocks of democracy. The federal government uses census numbers to determine how funding is allocated to states, to counties, onto cities, based on the actual count that they have for the people living in those areas. And so when we talk about, let's say, emergency response services, the amount of funding the city receives for emergency response services is directly based on a formula that includes census counts. So without an accurate count, the federal government is not going to give us the funds we need to provide those services to our residents. And this includes programs in education, like our National School Lunch Program. It includes for housing programs like Section 8. It includes Medicare. And so there's a whole array of programs that without an accurate census count, the city would not receive the funding that it needs to service or meet the demand of its residents.
Something like Section 8, because that is reduced costs for housing in a place like Los Angeles, where the cost of housing can be absolutely exorbitant and unattainable for many. I know full well people who are seniors or people who have limited incomes. Section 8 is the only way in which they can be self-sufficient, and that's such an incredibly important part of our society.
Absolutely. It's programs like Section 8. It's also programs like food and nutrition programs that a lot of our families in Los Angeles rely on. It's programs for transportation that Los Angeles right now is undergoing a major initiative to ensure that we have greener, more accessible public transportation. A portion of those funds are going to be funds that come from the federal government, and all based on census counts. So again, we're talking about the building blocks of democracy, and so this is why it's so important that people respond, because without that accurate count, we won't be able to get reap the benefits.
I was surprised to learn that 10 years ago, when this went down, we missed a seat in Congress by, what was it,
13,000 people.
That's
in the state of
like
California.
A drop of Los Angeles. I mean, that's doesn't seem to be possible.
Half of the size of one of our neighborhoods in
Yeah.
Los Angeles City, and this is the first time that the state of California had missed a chance to add a member to its congressional delegation since California became a state in 1850. So, this is really important. As the population of California grows, it's important that we see that reflected in the census counts, because that's the only way that we'll get equitable representation in Washington, D.C., and make sure that our elected officials are representing our concerns.
You touched on this a little bit earlier, but it's important, I think, to make this point. There are some fears and misconceptions about the census that I am sure many people have, just not based in fact. And how do you conquer those fears, and what are they?
Well, the way to conquer any fear is to get educated and knowledgeable about what the situation really is, right? And so one of the biggest misconceptions is that for some reason the Census Bureau will share your personal information with other government agencies, particularly law enforcement, so your information will remain confidential. And another misconception is that your information could be used to select you for jury service. Also wrong. The main piece of legislation that protects a person's individual information is Title 13 of the U.S. Code. That law states that no government agency can use your personal information for any other purpose. So your information will remain with the Census Bureau for 72 years, and any violation of that will result in penalties that include up to 5 years in prison or penalties of up to $250,000. So there's a real investment in just overall interest to keep a person's individual information private and confidential. And the U.S. Census Bureau does that by not just standing behind Title 13, but also by making sure that all of their employees take an oath to keep their information that they collect private and confidential.
Okay, but along those lines, sadly, scams exist. And I mean, we see that, there's warnings go out if the IRS will never call you on the phone. I mean, there's all things like that. Mm-hmm. So how can people be discreet and understand the difference between an honest-to-goodness inquiry from the census and a potential scam that they need to avoid?
Well, here's the basic things that you need to know to make sure that your information is kept safe, and that if you do speak with a census taker, you know that you can trust you're really talking to one. So one is, the Census Bureau will never ask you for credit card information, for your social security number. They will never ask you to make donations to any organization, including political parties. They will never ask you, solicit you via email or any other form of communication other than mail, U.S. mail. So if you get a text message, if you get an email, those messages are likely not coming directly from the Census Bureau. They may be coming from another organization. Now, it could be a legitimate outreach effort, like in the city of
Don't
Los
forget.
Angeles. We're trying to remind everybody to respond to the census. So it could be an organization trying to do good, but it could also be someone who's trying to scam you for information. So the bottom line is to think about, don't provide anybody with your credit card information. Don't provide your social security number. And if you do get a knock on your door from somebody who claims to be a census taker, you can always verify their information by calling the Census Bureau or looking up that individual's name online, and the Census Bureau has a staff directory. So just by typing in their first and last name, you'll be able to verify that it is indeed them. And all census takers who come to a person's door will have an ID badge with the Census Bureau logo and a badge and tablet that will allow them to enumerate everyone in the household.
Well, given the current safer at home situation, more than likely you're not going to have anybody knocking on your door. But are census takers actually going to be outside public facilities that may be open or starting to open?
The Census Bureau has a mobile questionnaire assistance program that they intended to roll out earlier this year as a way of encouraging people to respond to the census and making it more accessible for those that might not have the time to do it as part of their daily schedule. So that program has been delayed, and the Census Bureau hasn't indicated when they are going to be rolling out that program later this year. So we're still waiting for them to make that decision. But the Census Bureau has said that they will send out census takers to knock on doors of households that have not responded beginning August 11th.
Okay.
So if you don't want a census taker to knock on your door, respond to the census before August 11th.
I don't mean to be disparaging, but it's kind of well known. Los Angeles is notoriously hard to count. There have to be reasons. Why is LA so difficult to count? What is it about LA that sets it apart?
Los Angeles, you're right. Los Angeles is the hardest to count city and the hardest to count county in the entire country.
For heaven's sake.
We are in literally ground zero of what it is to get people to be counted. And I think it really is because of Los Angeles' geographic and demographic diversity. The Census Bureau has, through years of experience, identified hard to count populations as people who belong to racial and ethnic minorities, immigrants, people who don't speak English very well, renters, people who live at or below the poverty level, children 0 to 5, college students, seniors, people experiencing homelessness. Now, out of all of those categories, guess what? Los Angeles has among the largest populations, right? So it's no surprise that we have a hard time reaching people where they live. We have a hard time communicating to people who may speak a language other than English as their primary language. So for all of those reasons, the Census Bureau has identified Los Angeles as the hardest to count city in the country.
So what do you do to help?
We do things like this.
Because this is your responsibility. Congratulations.
First of all, we remain positive.
Right.
And we take on that challenge and do things like this and try to get the word out about how important the census is and educate everybody on, not just its importance, but how to fill it out and where they can do it. So I'm happy to be on the show to promote that message.
Absolutely.
And then doing our outreach efforts in partnership with community organizations, with philanthropic sector. Hopefully we do what we can to shed that label of hardest to count city.
Yes, we don't want that award.
No.
That's not a banner to wear or to put up on the streets. Okay, but based on that, there are definitely, you probably scale it in terms of success and how you feel or how LA feels about being counted. So 100% obviously is perfect. There's probably not a place in the entire United States that's going to hit that mark. Last time it was about 60+%, and that ended up being fine, but missed that seat in Congress. So what do you want? What do you see when everything 80, 90, 70? What'll make you happy?
Well, the Census Bureau will achieve 100% at the end of the day. How they get there, that's the question, right?
Okay.
So the Census Bureau will try and get as many people to self-respond to the census on their own. So, in 2010, 68% of Angelenos self-responded on their own, and the Census Bureau made up the difference on the back end. And the way they do that is by using administrative records and third-party data to supplement the information of the people that did not respond on their own. So the same thing will happen this time around. Whether we get to 68% or fall below that or even go beyond it, the Census Bureau's responsibility and duty is to make sure that they achieve 100% count. And they have indicated that they will be using things like administrative records, third-party data to make up that difference.
Yeah, that's interesting. You would think that, given an era of technology and AI and data collection, that might actually be a little bit more accurate than it has been in the past. I hadn't thought about the fact that if we don't say it, someone's going to say it for us. Oh, it's very interesting. We've talked a little bit about how the pandemic has affected getting the census taken and how important it is that those funds come to the area based on the numbers. What do you hope in regards to this whole COVID-19 not quite sure how I want to say this. How do you feel COVID-19 is going to affect the census numbers, I guess is what I'm asking.
So I think I think we're all trying to grapple with the pandemic, right? On a very basic level. We're just trying to get by, make sure that we continue to have shelter over our heads, feed our families, and continue operating as normal as we can. And to that extent, I think people are more focused on just meeting the needs of the day than participating in things like the census or something that the government is telling you this is important for you to participate in. That's the challenge that we have, is trying to rise through the noise and kind of wave to people like, hey, this is still important despite what's going on in the world today. And so my hope is that we're able to do just that, to rise above the noise and to get people to participate in the census in a way that continues to keep themselves and their families safe. So encouraging them to respond online, encouraging them to pick up a phone and call the Census Bureau and responding via phone, or returning the paper questionnaire that might have been mailed to their house. If we can encourage people to do that one simple act, the benefits that family, our city in general, will receive will be immeasurable in the funds that we receive for dealing with crises like this. During this pandemic, I can't imagine how much funds we've used for emergency response services, for instance.
It's incredible.
And so if we have an accurate count, that guarantees the federal government will give cities like Los Angeles the funds that it needs for the next 10 years to deal with any other pandemic that comes our way or any other catastrophe or national disaster. So that's my hope, is that we can rise above the noise and continue to push the importance of the census despite our trials and tribulations.
On a personal note, you've been fighting your entire career to let people know that what they have to say matters. I mean, because prior to being the census director, you were working very hard on getting people to vote. So this is obviously something that you've seen the positive outcome, and you've seen the negative repercussions of people who don't stand up and say, look, I am of value and my word, and my existence makes a difference.
Absolutely. If you don't speak up, someone else is going to speak up for you. If you don't get counted, then guess what? Some other state and some other jurisdiction is going to reap the benefits of your money that rightly belongs in your city, in your neighborhood. So it's important to stand up and be counted and be seen, because without being seen, then nobody is going to know who you are and what your needs are.
Have you watched things progress? Do you think people are getting more aware of the fact that their vote matters, that their census numbers matter, that their opinions matter? Do you feel that there's a positive progression going that way?
I have great hope for the future. I have been encouraged to see all of the demonstrations in the last number of years, just people going out and standing up for what they believe in, whether it's women's rights, whether it's immigrant rights, or other kinds of initiatives. The number of people that I've seen stand up and say, I believe in this, and just by the number of demonstrations and chants I hear outside of City Hall, that's encouraging to me, because that just means that people are paying attention and they want their government to be accountable. So seeing that gives me encouragement for the future.
Okay, so your job got extended by a few months, but then what do you do? Do you know?
So we're going to continue fighting that good fight. My work to make sure that people are civically engaged in their city and in their government is going to continue, whether I'm in the mayor's office or whether I'm somewhere else. To me, it's important that people know that they have really the keys to the city in their hands, and they have the power to make change.
Well, you make change based on all of your enthusiasm and passion for having this happen. All right, so let's just get the basics really quick. So if people want to go online, the best resource is?
Go to my2020census.gov to respond to the census questionnaire. If you want more information about the census and why it's so important, you can always go to census.lacity.org, and we have outreach resources and informational material, and also a link to respond to the questionnaire itself.
And in different languages?
Yes. We provide information in 12 non-English languages. So if English is not your primary language, there is likely a language that we provide service for.
All right. Well, make sure that you get counted. It's imperative for your future, your children's future, and for everyone around you. Well, I cannot thank you enough for sharing this information, and I hope that everybody has listened clearly. And best way to get word out these days also, because we're in little bubbles, is word of mouth.
That's right.
So
share. Social media, #2020census, anything you can do, encourage your family, friends, send text messages, email blasts, whatever you can do.
Well, thank you so much, Maria. It was really fun to talk to you.
It's a pleasure to be here, Maria.